What's up everybody? Shadowlands release is just around the corner now, watching us, waiting for us. But when it does release, it comes with a choice, what to main. So for this video I'll be going over my top 3 tank picks going into Shadowlands. This is largely based on my personal opinion of the soon to be mentioned tanks based on my raid/dungeon testing so far on beta. Things I consider for this is first and foremost, how much fun are they? Am I enjoying myself while doing said content? Secondly, how good are they for the content I'll be doing, which is raids and dungeons? And lastly, what do they bring to said content? And like I said, this is just my personal opinion, and by no means I play this and only this, because again, stuff can change. If you want to help me out or support me, don't forget to subscribe. Check me out on Twitch, Stankie Gaming, and on Patreon. Now, starting off with my personal favorite, gameplay-wise, it's Protection Paladin. Their overall rework or conversion to Holy Power is something I've enjoyed immensely. I've always enjoyed Prot Paladins a lot, spamming Avenger Shields, having that off-heal utility, blessings, immune and all that jazz. And going into Shadowlands, they've just doubled down on the fun. If you're not up to date on what's new for Protection Paladin, you can check out my What's New video covering that. But overall, with the current tuning, they feel really strong in both raids and M+, maybe not in the highest of high key, but for your average pusher, it's real good. The new raid tier has a lot of mechanics that can be cheesed, if you will, by Blessing of Protection, Spell Warding, and Bubble, making them very valuable for that reason alone. But there's also a lot of fight with adds where Protection Paladins really shine. More targets means more Holy Power, which means more survival as well as damage. And the conversion to Holy Power also adds a bit more choice into our gameplay, where we can swap between keeping SOTR up or heal with Word of Glory, and this works extremely well in a raiding environment where you can do an absurd amount of healing on your co-tank when you're not actively tanking, or to save your fellow raid member if you want to do that. So going into Castle Nathria, Prot Paladins have a very good toolkit to deal with a lot of fights and mechanics, great damage and healing, and they're just a ton of fun to play. Then we can shift the focus to M+, where it gets even better. As I previously mentioned, more targets means more Holy Power, since you naturally get more Avenger Shield resets. Much to my dismay though, they nerfed or changed it a bit. Used to be that Avenger Shield gave you 1 Holy Power first time you used it on a mob, which meant any pack would pretty much cap out your Holy Power on your first Avenger Shield. Sadly, that's not the case anymore. Now instead we get Holy Power from Judgment, which works a lot better on single target, but it's less fun on AoE. However, like I said, more Avenger Shield procs means more Holy Power, damage, and survival, especially when you factor in the reworked first Avenger talent that gives it more bounces, and 100% of all of your Avenger Shield damage is given to you as an absorb, which just fuels you even further. And the addition of Divine Purpose, where you have a chance to proc free spenders anytime you use a Holy Power spending ability, the list just goes on. It's very spammy, very procy, very bursty, and so much fun. Even with the starter low haste gear, non-optimized setup, it really doesn't feel clunky at all when you're in a dungeon. On top of this, having all of that utility feels great in M+, Blessing of Freedom, Cleanse Toxins, Bubbles, and Sacrifice, as well as all that off-healing you can cram out with Word of Glory. And again, pending tuning, the amount of damage we can dish out on an AoE with certain setups is crazy. Might not be the go-to build for super hard M+ push, but for grinding dungeons, I mean your weekly 15s, your 15 weekly 15s, will just speed things up. But also, come on, who doesn't like melting Pax's tank? Ugh. Last thing to mention is the Covenants. As far as Covenants goes, there is one I love, one I'm fine with, and one that would break it for me. Ventyr's Soulbinds and abilities are looking pretty strong for raiding, at least from a damage perspective. Big cooldown, tons of damage and healing, not very fun, but gets the job done. And with the recent change to it, so it now works on AoE as well, makes it a lot more useful in dungeons, unlike the previous one, which only had use on single target fights. And the signature ability, Door of Shadows, will probably see a lot of use in M+, and raiding for dodging mechanics. And it's a bit of added mobility that Prot Paladins do lack. Overall though, not the most fun Covenant for Protection Paladins, but might be the go-to thing for progression raiding. The one I love though is Kyrian. Great Soulbind, amazing ability, and very useful signature ability. And the Paladin ability is Divine Toll, which is just too much fun. You fling out those extra Avenger Shield they just bounce around between all your targets, capping out your holy power, does a metric ton of bursty damage, which helps a lot with threat on big pulls, synergizes well with our legendaries and talents like First Avenger, and yeah, just all around amazing Covenant ability, as long as it's not on single target, because on single targets it's just an extra Avenger shield with a long cooldown. And this used to annoy me a lot, but I've kinda come to terms with it. I'm kinda fine with it not being busted for all content. There's still a ton of fights, both in the new raid as well as bosses and dungeons that have ads where you get use out of it. And the ones that you don't, you still gain a lot from their soulbinds and signature ability, or rather Vial of Serenity. The extra panic heal that removes diseases, poisons, curses, and most importantly bleeds is something that is highly featured in the new raid. So with our bubbles in this pot, there's so many mechanics we can ignore, which is really good. So like I said, even if Divine Toll is less than awesome on pure single target, the Covenant still has a lot to bring. Lastly, the one I don't want, which is Night Fade. The Covenant and binds are fine, Soul Shape is amazing, I just don't want to be stuck being a buff bot during raids. Ask priests if they're hyped for power infusion. I want it! No, I do! But it's better for me! Yeah, I look forward to hearing that all the time. Give me the buff. But yeah, like I said, Soul Shape is amazing, so I don't mind the Covenant as such, just if we're forced to buff other people than ourselves all the time. Which we would be, because it'd be wasted on a tank most of the time. Some might like it, I'm not one of them. Too long, didn't want to listen. Prot Paladins going into Shadowlands, fast paced, tons of damage and utility, very strong. And they have been my go-to pick for fun in dungeons throughout the beta. Mind you, they'll probably get nerfed damage-wise, but even if that happens, they'll still be very fun to play. So whenever I've been doing all of this tank testing, I've always relapsed back to Protection Palette in between for just a few dungeons. Now on with the show! Blood DK. If you're not up to date with all new things Blood DK in Shadowlands, make sure to check out my What's New video. Blood DK is something I've always enjoyed playing immensely. The reactive self-heal style they have combined with the control that grips bring is just awesome to me. And all of that and more in Shadowlands. Now, going into Shadowlands, Blood DK has just gotten stronger, both from Covenants as well as all the unpruning Blizzard has done. Having Anti-Magic Zone is big, as it gives Blood DK even more value in raids outside of either being really tanky or hey, we need grips. Anti-Magic Zone is great for dungeons as well, as there are loads of mechanic where extra magic damage reduction will help. So yeah, a huge plus. The return of Lichborn, which not only gives us an immunity to Charm, Fear, and Sleep mechanics, which potentially can be huge in raids as well as dungeons, it also grants us tons of Leech and can be further improved through conduits to also decrease damage taken by up to 15%, turning Lichborn into a proper defensive cooldown. There's just a ton of useful stuff returning in Shadowlands, and they all make us stronger and give us more control over our self-healing and damage intake, which I am a huge fan of as a tank. Now, going into the new raid Castle Nathria, Blood DKs are looking really strong as well. Lots of fight with ads where grips are great, damage patterns that suits Blood DK very well, so our self-sustain and survival feels amazing. The only thing we lack at the moment is damage. Compared to some of the other tanks, our overall damage output is on the low side of low. But even so, the utility, self-sustain, survival we have, and how a lot of the encounters work in the new raid, that might not matter too much. There's also a lot of mechanics where Anti-Magic Shell, AMS, is extremely useful, which allows you to remove traps, ignore debuffs, etc, etc. So overall, very useful. So like I said, from the raid testing I've done so far across the beta, the raid seems very Blood DK friendly. Of course, in the end, we're all at the mercy of Blizzard's tuning, but I'm hopeful. I mean, it is a DK expansion-ish. On the M+ side of life, all of the aforementioned positive things can be applied here as well. Grips are grips, and will always be valuable in M+. Our self-sustain is great, lots of mechanics that can be cheesed, if you will, by AMS and Lichborn. Overall, it's just a blast playing them in keys. And if our damage gets turned up just a notch, it would be even better. As not only would we do more damage, which, yes please, but we'd also gain even more from all that leech we have at our disposal. 15% from Voracious Talent, 10% from Lichborn just translates to even more self-sustain. Not that we lack it, but I love when our damage or rotation affects more than just the damage we do. If our rotation fuels our healing, our mitigation, and everything like that, I'm on board. So more damage just translates into more healing in this. And with that said, let's hop into the Covenants instead. At the moment, it's currently looking pretty much like Night Fae for me, even when Blizzard went and swirled the nerf hammer instead of buffing the other covenants, used to be 15% damage reduction and strength, and this refreshed anytime D&D ticked. Now it's down to 8% damage reduction and strength, and it's applied by Heartstrike during Death's Due. And this is bothersome for a few reasons. On AoE, getting the most out of this requires a lot of time now, and requires you to be able to wildly Heartstrike during D&D. And if you need to refresh Bone Shield or Death Strike, then that's less stacks. Plus, to keep it refreshed, you need to keep spamming that Heartstrike every now and then. On top of this, it no longer hits every single target inside of D&D, just the ones you hit with Heartstrike. However, on single target, so for raids, it's a lot less impactful. The nerf, that is. Sure, going down from 15% to 8% hurts, but keeping 100% uptime is almost as easy as it previously was. Only thing to keep in mind now is that you can't refresh it unless you're in melee. Previously, you could just throw away your D&D and refresh it that way. But it's still very, very good. Still works very well on AoE and single target. Still a lot of free-ish damage reduction that works on multiple targets. And most importantly, you still get Soul Shape, which is amazing as Blood DK. I just hope they change the Heartstrike part a little bit. Having to use 8 Heartstrikes to max it out just feels like a lot. Maybe give us 2 stacks per Heartstrike. So why Night Fae and not the other covenants? Well, Conduits and Soulbinds asides, they will matter, but tuning is all whacked out right now. So strictly looking at the ability, Night Fae is still the most impactful one out of all the covenants. A lot less fun, but everything you get from Night Fae is pretty much stuff Blood DKs really want. More strength, more damage reduction, more mobility, works on single target and AoE. Compare that to Venthyr, that's great on AoE, crap on single target. Offers no defensive component outside of runic power, which is only useful on AoE, since you get so little when it's only one target. Necrolord falling in the same trap, good for AoE damage wise and utility wise in dungeons to some extent, and it now also gives us 3 stacks of Bone Shield on use, which I mean is better than nothing, but kinda doesn't change anything. We gain a rune and a global pretty much, or 2 runes I guess. It's really fun though, I really like this covenant ability, it's just not good. And Kyrian's latest change where it now has a 50% chance to spread when you spend runes on a direct damage ability, so Heartstrike Marin, makes it a lot better for AoE. You're actually extremely good on AoE. Damage is crazy, 5% DR on targets it's spread to isn't too shabby either. On single target, it's a bit worse off than before, but still more damage than all of the other covenants for pure single target. But unless the DPS part of Kyrian turns out to be something we really need, I have a hard time seeing why I should go anything other than Night Fae for progression at least. For dungeons and such, I'd probably go Venthyr for that extra damage and runic power, or Kyrian for even more damage. But again, this can swing around with the next set of tuning, which will probably be them nerfing Night Fae again instead of buffing / changing the other covenants more. Can't have fun things. And the last tank out is Brewmaster. And if you aren't up to date on what's new for Brewmasters in Shadowlands, make sure to check out my What's New video. Anyways, Brewmaster has been updated a lot over the course of Alpha and Beta, lots of unpruning here, big change to how we juggle our brews and stagger, and yes, the addition of Celestial Brew. Now compared to the Prot Paladin and Blood DK, Brewmaster isn't something I choose because I love to play it, or because it's the most fun class. I'm not a huge fan of Brewmaster rotation overall, it can get pretty boring, but I am a fan of strong tanks, and Brewmaster might just be that again. They're a very safe pick, which makes them very comfortable to progress tank with, as you always have your mitigation up, there's not a lot of CDs to care or to juggle, and you have a huge absorb shield to use, which just makes life easier. And the way our brews work now, tied together with the Necrolord Covenant, which I'll touch on in a bit, makes a rotation a bit more interesting. Cleansing Stagger to fuel the beast that is Celestial Brew. It adds a lot to the gameplay for me at least, and it adds self-sustain controlled by us. Unlike Celestial Fortune that just looks like we self-heal a lot, not being 100% at the mercy of our dear healers is a big plus to how this spec plays, and currently Celestial Brew does just that, although I'd prefer it to be on a lower cooldown. They recently slashed it, or well, increased the cooldown a lot. Even though I'm not a fan of the recent increase to its cooldown from a gameplay perspective, it def needed tuning, but in my opinion not in the form of a longer cooldown and nerf to the absorb, but we'll see where we land in the end. Going into raids, now that Magic Stagger is back, it was removed during most of the alpha and early beta, so if it's back for good, this fixes a lot of issues they faced in the new raid, but even without Magic Stagger, their survival was still very good, now even more so. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot to say about them as far as the raid goes. Transcendence will be really nice for some fights, Statue for some, Ring of Peace for some. None that I see as something groundbreaking during testing, but of course, such things can change. And then obviously there's the goddamn physical damage buff. Anyways, for M+, we're looking very strong as well. Tons of survival and self-sustain, fair amount of damage, and a lot of utility from Ring of Peace, Leg Sweep, and Detox to mention a few. Touch of Death is a really nice addition as well to burst down priority targets on trash. And with all the target caps and reduced damage beyond X target, Statue is real nice as well. If there's a ton of mobs or you're doing big pulls, to make sure everything is smacking you and you alone. And depending on how much we'll end up pulling in dungeons once we get our binds, legendaries, conduits, and gear, this can be very impactful for those Omega Pepega pulls. Covenant wise, personally, I favor Necrolord a lot. Bone Dust Brew, which increases cooldown reduction on brews from Tiger Palm and Keg Smash, feels so rewarding. And it can potentially do a ton of damage on multi-targets, especially with the Bone Marrow Hops conduit that reduces Bone Dust Brew cooldown anytime it deals damage or healing, as well as increases the proc's damage and healing. So you pop this, and anytime you use an ability, it has a chance to replicate to do shadow damage, and anytime that happens, its cooldown is reduced. Overall, it's just fun to play with, and it fits the theme of Shadowlands as well as Brewmaster. Not that chugging bone dust sounds too pleasant, but it's pleasant to play with, and adds some more depth to our gameplay, minmaxing cooldown reduction during it or damage done during it, as it has that 35% chance to replicate 35% of your damage and healing, so there's more to it than just push button receive bacon. This time, bacon gets more crispy if you pay some attention to it. Fleshcraft, however, is not awesome, but what you gonna do? Only Kyrian really has a signature ability that would be great for us, due to it removing bleeds and other debuffs, which can be extremely valuable. And the Weapons of Order ability is really strong as well. I just like Bone Dust Brew a lot more. It changes how we approach our rotation a bit. So yeah, Brewmaster is more fun than they were in BFA, but not by a lot. And if they end up being nerfed a ton, I don't see myself going for this, but they're def up for consideration, because like I said, they're usually very cushy to tank with. Stagger is like a warm blanket of foolproof tanking. And that's pretty much it. Mostly, I am torn between Blood DK, Prot Paladin, with the slight chance of going Celestial Brew. Unless they turn it all around and Giga buff Vengeance Demon Hunter, because honorable mention, they're super fun, just not super good. And believe it or not, I actually had to pace myself talking about Prot Paladins and Blood DK. There's just a lot I like with them. And I'm very happy with the overall changes, which is why they're my go-to in Shadowlands. Are they perfect? Remove global cooldown from grips and Word of Glory, and we're getting there. There are some cracks though, they aren't perfect, but they're a lot of fun and I really enjoy playing them. But yeah, I hope I made your decision going into Shadowlands even harder. Let me know in the comments below what you're looking to main going into Shadowlands, or your overall thoughts on the tank so far. And if you like this video, don't forget to share it, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell. Also, don't forget to check me out on Twitch or support me on Patreon to join the Stankie Discord. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.